Alright, let's talk about the talking board, or otherwise known as the spirit board, the witch board, or more commonly known as the Ouija board. And, there's been a lot of bad stuff being said about the talking board over the many years, so I just want to clear some of that up and have a better look at it. Welcome to my channel. You are entering the world of magic and mysticism with your host, Lee W. Johnson. Keep the lights on and help improve the channel by becoming a supporter for just $2.99 per month. Hit the join button. Okay, the talking board, or the spirit board, or the Ouija board. So this is used to commune with spirits. It is a tool, but there is a lot of fear surrounding it. I think the biggest misunderstanding is often that you will be opening the gates of hell when you use the talking board. I'm not sure why people think this. If you actually look back into the history of the talking board, even before it became the Ouija board, we're going back to the mid to late 1800s. And this all developed out of spiritualism. Now, spiritualism, if you actually have a good look at it, is Catholicism or Christianity. It's heavily influenced by Catholicism. So, to think that these people were using these tools and thinking that they were opening the gates of hell is kind of ridiculous to even start thinking about. So why we think that now? Simple. Hollywood. We have all of the fantastic films and horror stories about the talking board from Hollywood movies. But of course, there are still stories of people being possessed or committing suicide or whatever it is after using the talking board without it being actually related to Hollywood. But there are some situations where this could be true. There are some situations in this instance where it was just bad usage. It was not respecting the board itself. It was not actually knowing how to use it in the first place, because there are some particular rules to it. But if you don't respect the tools and you don't respect the spirits, you could end up in a bit of shit. And there are some cases where they're just elaborate stories, and I can make up stories, and they'd be fantastic, but none of it would be true. Now, one interesting thing about the etymology of the word Ouija. So, for a very long time, and this is something I actually believed, it was understood that the word Ouija came from the French and the German words for yes. Now it was, let me just get the name here, Robert Murch. He really delved into the history of the talking board, the Ouija board. And he discovered that the original creators of the Ouija board, the people who originally patented and trademarked Ouija, who were it was five chaps, and then Fuld from the Kennedy Novelty Company. So they asked the board what to call it, and the board said Ouija, and then they asked it what that means, and it said good luck. So the name itself actually comes from the board. Now, it was Elijah J. Bond's sister-in-law, her name was Helen Peters, who was the medium that used the board in order to for them to ask the name, what name it wants to be used. Elijah J. Bond was the man who originally patented, I hate that word, patented the Ouija board in 1891. So the company, the Kennedy Novelty Company, was created in 1890. They then patented the board in 1891. It went through various name changes and such. Kennedy left the company or was kicked out or something, and then 1892, 1892. I hope I've been saying 1891 and 1890 up to now. In 1892, it then changed to the Ouija Novelty Company. And there's an interesting character in this whole story is William Fuld, F-U-L-D. He was the person who actually created the Ouija board, but he doesn't claim to be the inventor of it. A lot of people say he was the inventor of the board, of the talking board, but he never claimed to be the inventor, because people were using the talking board long before Ouija was created. So the history of it really boils down to spiritualism, and this started in 1848 with the Fox sisters, when they were discovered, because they heard tapping and banging in the walls, and when they started asking questions, they were getting yes and no answers from these tappings in the walls of their house. And from there, spiritualism was developed, and the main method at the time was to use a table, and this was called table tipping or table tapping, and all of the participants would get around the table. They would place their palms, lightly place their palms or just their fingertips on the top of the table, and then they would start asking questions, and when the spirit came onto the table, it would then start answering through taps. So it would lift the table up and then tap one or more feet down on the floor or the table legs, and from there they decided to create the talking board, because they found this to be a quite cumbersome session. You could get yes and no answers, so you may get a no being one tap and a yes being two taps, but you could also spell out names and spell out words and entire sentences. The way they did this was to start going through the alphabet and then wait for a tap. So you may say A, no tap, B, no tap, C, and then it would tap, and then that's your first letter, C. Then you would go on to the next letter, which is quite a lengthy process. So what they decided to do was develop something which was a bit quicker. So they created the talking board, and then the pointer or the planchette would then move around to the different letters and numbers. So it became a bit easier to actually communicate with the spirits themselves. Now, regarding the patents and the trademarks of Ouija, if you do go to I'll put them in the links in the description below as well, but if you do go to the blog post for this, I'll also put the link for that in the description. Then you'll find a link on there to William Fuld's website, and it lists all of the patents and trademarks on there, which is quite interesting to actually look through. In 1982, Fuld actually came up with a different pointer, and he trademarked that. Why it never became mainstream, I'm not sure, but it apparently had magnetized wires in it. And the interesting thing is that it was said to be able to ask you questions as well. So it wasn't just you asking the board or the spirit questions. The spirit could then ask you questions, which I thought was quite interesting. So he trademarked that. Now, another interesting thing was, let me just find where it was. It was Harry M. Bigelow. He also patented a talking board in 1920, completely separate from the Kennedy Novelty Company and Fuld, etc., etc. Now, his board I thought was quite interesting. This was patented in 1920. Again, I'll put the links in the description and you can check them out on my website in the blog post. There's a link to the actual patent on there, and it gives the pictures. So what this was, it was a slider. So it was a long thing with a slider, and then it had the letters and numbers at the top, and the pointer kind of sat on a slide rail. And so you would put your fingers on the pointer, and then it would slide left and right along the slide rail, and then stop at particular letters or numbers, which I thought was really, really cool. I like that one. Again, that one didn't find it into the mainstream. The standard Ouija board that we find now from the Kennedy Novelty Company is the one that made it into mainstream, and it made them a lot of money, a hell of a lot of money, and it still does. Well, it doesn't make them money. What happened was in 1948. Yeah, so the company was started as the Kennedy Novelty Company in 1890. They then patented and trademarked, or patented at least the board in 1891. Over the years, they added patents and changed trademarks, added trademarks, etc., etc., etc. As you'll see if you go to the link on Fold's website, there are a lot of different trademarks and patents. So that was 1891. Then 1892, they changed the name to the Ouija Novelty Company because Kennedy left. Then in I said 1948 just now. It wasn't 1948, correction, it was 1966. So in 1966, Parker Brothers then bought William Fold Incorporated. At some point, it seems that the name changed from the Ouija Novelty Company into William Fold Incorporated, but I couldn't quite trace back where that happened. But Parker Brothers bought everything, all the rights and assets, in 1966. So they then claimed the trademark patent for Ouija, and then Parker Brothers was taken over by Hasbro Incorporated in 1991. So they are the current trademark holders. Just a little bit of history for interest's sake. Okay, so a couple things that we find people saying about the talking board. One of them is you pushed it. It comes up quite a lot. Skeptics will sit down with people using the board, and a healthy level of skepticism is great, but some people go a bit overboard with their skepticism, and it just becomes non-belief, which is different to skepticism if you actually look at the word properly. But anyway, getting off track. So you may sit down with somebody who has a complete disregard or disbelief of what's going on, and as the pointer is moving around, they will tell you there's no spirits involved, you just pushed it around. I think we need to ask the question here, what actually moves the pointer? And the usual response is the spirits have possessed your arms and moving your arms around, which is moving the pointer. I actually disagree with this. Now, the main reason for that understanding is when you're actually using the board, you start to feel a sensation in your arms and your hands. It's often a tingling, or it might start feeling like your hands or your arms are kind of cloudy or fluffy. It's almost like a displacement happens. You can't, your arms are there, but they don't feel like they're in the right place. But whatever the sensation is, there's some kind of sensation which takes over your arms. Now, if we actually go back to table tipping, we can understand this a bit better. My belief is that it isn't the spirit possessing your arms, it's that the spirit is actually moving the pointer itself. And it's able to do this because of the shared energy. So the sensation you get in your arms is actually a buildup of energy, and that buildup, as long as you remain in contact with the object that is being moved, that buildup of energy is then shared with the spirit, which can then move the object around. Now, the reason I say this, as I said, we come back to table tipping. When we look at table tipping, we have a situation where we have one person or a group of people sitting around a table, and it's usually one of those smaller round tables with 3 legs, and all of these people have their palms lightly placed on top of the table, or their fingertips, just their fingertips touching, and the table will lift and tap a leg down on the floor. Okay. In some reports, in some situations, and I was reading this recently in a book, and I've forgotten the lady's name. It's called Table Tipping for Beginners. She actually relays a lot of personal experiences. So most of the book is actually personal experiences. She's teaching through personal experience, which I think is fantastic. But a lot of the experiences she has are not just the table lifting, one leg lifting up and tapping the ground. There are situations where the table will spin. There are situations where the table will literally lift off the floor and hover in mid-air, where it will actually turn over and then turn back again. It will lift off and touch the shoulders of people. The legs will touch the shoulders of people. I think that's when it's turned upside down, because what you'll find is that during this whole thing, when it's spinning, when it's lifting off the ground, the people's fingertips are still touching the surface of the table, but they are not underneath the table where they can lift it. It is on top of the table, where if you lift your hands off, you just lift your hands off, you disconnect from the tabletop. Okay, so this table, this physical object, is doing things which cannot be explained in any way except that something metaphysical is moving it. There are cracks, there are frauds, there are scam artists who will use wires and things like that, or they'll push the table up with their knee. But there are genuine people out there who are working the table, who are doing this type of work. And it is legit. Okay, so we find that just resting the fingertips on the table moves a table, and it's the shared energy with the spirit. You are communicating with the spirit that is coming onto the table, that is moving the table. Okay, so it's the spirit itself which is moving the table. The sensation you feel is the shared energy. You're sharing the energy so that the spirit can have a more tangible experience in our physical world. So coming back to the pointer on the talking board, I believe it's the same thing. It's not that the spirit is possessing your arms or your hands, it's that the spirit is sharing your energy, which is allowing them to actually move the pointer around. And as long as you remain touching or constantly, or as long as you are still touching the pointer, then the spirit will be able to move it around. So anyway, that's my understanding and knowledge of that. Another thing which you should be doing is closing the door after you. And this is where a lot of the horror stories of possession and hauntings come from, because what happens is you don't close the door and things come through. So let's look at it from this perspective. If you were in a room and you wanted to walk into the neighboring room, you would have to walk through a door. Okay, if that door is closed and locked, you can't go through into the other room. As soon as somebody opens it for you, you can walk in. You do your thing, then you say goodbye to them, you walk back into your room, they close it afterwards. If they do not close it afterwards, you can walk freely in and out, and so can anybody else. So when you're working with, I mean, this is different to other techniques where you're not directly working with spirit. This is directly working with spirits. Okay, so what you need to do is open a door for the spirits to be able to come in. When you're finished, you need to say goodbye, send them back through into their room, and close the door behind them and lock it. And this is the same as if you were casting a circle. If you were casting a magical circle, you are going to the quarters, or you're calling the god and goddess in some fashion or manner. You are calling to spirits, and you're asking those spirits to come into your space and witness your rite, work with you, aspect them in order to attain their energy, so you can put it into a talisman. Whatever it is, you are casting a circle, you are opening a door, and that door brings the spirits into your space. When you are finished with your magical ritual, what do? You close. So you would go around to all the spirits again, and you would say, thank you for being here. I appreciate your attendance. I appreciate your help in the matter, blah, 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 whatever it is. And then you wish them a safe journey home, and you bid them farewell, and you close the circle. So you open the circle and you close the circle. So when you're doing anything where you're working with spirits, you need to remember to close afterwards. If you don't, you're going to end up with problems of astral parasites coming through, of spirits of ghosts, or deceased people who are a little bit bitter. There are many different spirits that could come through and cause problems, hauntings, attachments which start bleeding your energy. There's lots of situations, lots of different ways we can look at this, or things that happen. But that all the horror stories that come revolving around talking board, blaming the talking board is stupid. It doesn't help anybody. It's not the talking board's fault. It's the person who used the damn thing. And this is where things just get annoying, because we blame the tool, not the person using it. And the reason why these things happened is because the person didn't know how to use it. They didn't know how to use the tool properly. So learn how to use the tool. All right. So remember, when you're working with spirits, you're opening a door. When you're finished working with them, you need to close that door. So what if something does get hold of your board? There are certain situations where a spirit can come through, an astral parasite or whatever it may be, who can take possession of your board. And it attaches, it will not leave, and it starts to get stronger and stronger, and it will cause hauntings, it will start throwing things around, it will threaten you, it could physically harm you. These things are real, and in most cases it's because the person didn't really know what they were doing, but it can happen to anybody. So you need to take proper precautions. Now, being magic users, we should have a practice of cleansing and protection in place already. If you need to up that protection, what you can do is ask somebody to stand at the door. And in this case, what I mean by somebody is a spirit. So it can be a guardian spirit, it can be a god or goddess, it can be an angel, it can be a demon, whatever spirit you feel is best suited for that purpose, to stand at the door, guard it, and make sure that it just stays orderly. So there aren't like hundreds and hundreds of dead rushing through and going, oh, listen to me. It becomes an orderly thing where one comes through, gets an answer, or they speak to you, and then they go back and the next one comes through. So it becomes this orderly thing, but also to guard against astral parasites coming through. If anything does go wrong, if a spirit comes through which is threatening, it can get rid of it. So this is someone to stand at the door and guard it. All right. I use boon in any kind of spirit work where I'm opening up a door and I need somebody to stand there and guard it for me while I'm doing the work, I will ask Boone from the Goesha to do that for me. So, you can use Boone, or you can use any other spirit which you feel is best suited for that thing. Now, what do you do if spirit does get hold of your board? S. Connolly actually has an excellent method. She speaks about it in her book Demonologist's Guide to Demonic Magic. So because when she was younger, she had an experience where they had to actually dispose of a board because there was a spirit called Samuel that had taken possession of it and was causing problems, physically threatening her friend, and hauntings and such things. So what they did is they burnt the board, and then they collected the ashes of the board. They put them into separate containers. Put them into 2 or 3 containers. 2 should be sufficient. And then what you do is you drive out to a running body of water somewhere, a river, a stream, and you discard one of the containers, discard the ashes into the water. Then you go far, far away to a different body of running water, so another river or stream or brook, somewhere else, completely different, not the same river, and you discard the other container in there. So you've burnt the board, you've made it into ashes, you have purified it with fire, then you take the ashes, you separate them, and you put them into running water which runs away from each other, so they're not coming together. So that's, I think, is a really good method. I've never had to do it myself, so but I thought it makes sense, because as I said, you're purifying with fire, and then you are separating the remains of that fire, and you are moving them away from each other, never to connect again. So I thought it was very good. So, alright, after all of that, is the talking board good or evil? It's neither. It is a tool. And just as you would need to know and learn how to use an axe, you need to learn how to use a talking board properly. It's no good going into a crowded room and swinging your axe around. That's going to cause problems. But if you learn how to properly use an axe, you can chop wood, and you can even make a beautiful statue out of it, or using it. So it's really a case of what the user does with it. So it's not the board that causes the problems, it's the user, because the user doesn't know how to actually use it. So do your research properly. And I mean properly. An example would be somebody who wants to work with fairy and doesn't understand why they don't want to be near them every time they pull out their steel athame. It's because fairies are allergic to iron, and you might be saying, but it's a steel athame, it's not an iron athame. Do your research. Steel is an alloy made of iron and carbon, so it really is. Anything you do in magic, you really need to do your research, and don't just take one person's word for it. Go and research 10 different people on the same topic, and then you can start to piece together what is true and what is absolute garbage. Alright, but definitely do your research. It is vital. Okay. Alright, so that's it for today, and I'll see you on Wednesday for Ask Lee. Have a good one for now. Cheers, bye bye.